Hello, everybody. Welcome to my channel. My name is Margaret, and you're on BookTube. Welcome to today's dramatic reading. It is a Friday. Congratulations, you've made it. That is an achievement. And so in reward for that, which is a paltry reward, but I have this series that I did somewhat regularly last year, and I'm bringing it back. It's called Dramatic Readings. So I'm just going to use some of the recent reads. If you are a similar kind of person, you do tabs and stuff as you go through, or you turn down corners. And so I thought I'd pick the best of those and bring them up and read them out. And it's kind of like try a chapter. It tells you a little bit about books that you may want to read if my description or my review maybe didn't motivate you enough. So there we go. John's there saying, howdy, howdy. Howdy to you. And so, yeah, I thought I'd revive this little series, and we're going to start. Let's see if I had any announcements. No. We're going to start with a book that I had read for Victober and was pretty excited about, Three Men in a Boat. And it's just a very short piece I'm going to read here, but I thought I'd pop that up and be real fancy. So there we go. My review for this book was that it was funny in parts, but it was just over the top. It was just too much dryness, tongue-in-cheekness, and it just sort of didn't land with me. So I wasn't too mad at it because it's a very short book, but one of the little passages that I liked, I will read because I enjoyed it. And I think people who watch my channel might enjoy it as well. So basically, it's about a guy who in the 1880s takes two of his friends and a dog and goes up the River Thames to be on a holiday, a river holiday. And they're all sort of well-off toffs, as they would say, and don't really know how things work or how to do things for themselves. And so that's why hilarity ensues. But just like, what are those Chevy Chase movies? Something Vacation, Christmas Vacation. Just like those movies where like they hit the same note so much, it just sort of wears thin for me. But anyway, this is the good part, so I'll read it out to you. Did I get the right page? Okay. Here we go. Three Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome, page 91. It took us half an hour's hard labor after that before it was properly up, and then we cleared the decks and got out supper. We put the kettle on to boil, up in the nose of the boat, and went down to the stern and pretended to take no notice of it, but set to work to get the other things out. That is the only way to get a kettle to boil up the river. If it sees that you are waiting for it and are anxious, it will never even sing. You have to go away and begin your meal as if you were not going to have any tea at all. You must not even look round at it. Then you will soon hear it sputtering away, mad to be made into tea. It is a good plan, too, if you are in a great hurry, to talk very loudly to each other about how you don't need any tea and are not going to have any. You get near the kettle so that it can overhear you, and then you shout out, I don't want any tea. Do you, George? To which George shouts back, oh no, I don't like tea. We'll have lemonade instead. Tea's so indigestible. Upon which the kettle boils over and puts the stove out. We adopted this harmless bit of trickery, and the result was that by the time everything else was ready, the tea was waiting. So that was a funny part. I just liked listening in on some of the conversations, but as I said, some of them then go a little over the top. So I will be returning this to the book ecosystem and saying, thank you, Victober, for showing me something that I had not seen before, but we're done. We're done with that one. So Three Men in a Boat is done. The next one I am going to read from is Labor and Capital in the Gilded Age, edited by John Garraty. It's funny. I had to upload my own picture for Storygraph because they didn't have it. Amazon, of course, has a photo, but my picture in Storygraph didn't come up in Google results, so I have to use Amazon's picture. Kind of weird. Anyway, You've definitely heard me talk about this one before. It's a series of congressional interviews with people who are on both sides of labor and capital and in between, because they started on one and ended on the other, etc. And basically, it's Congress trying to figure out what the problem is between labor and capital and how they can perhaps legislate their way out of it, but none too well. So this is going to be an interesting one, especially because it's the testimony of Henry George. And Henry George is someone I was interested in putting sort of tentacles of his into my story. He is best known now, I think, for being the champion of the single tax, which is a radical policy recommendation in the 1880s and 90s. It sort of gained traction and then failed totally. So he is a very interesting personality. And I'd encourage if you want to look into Henry George background. But this is a couple pages of what he's explaining about labor and capital, and you'll see why I like it. So this is Labor and Capital in the Gilded Age, page 156. Here we go. The general fact, however, is that there exists among the laboring classes of the United States a great and growing feeling of dissatisfaction and discontent. As to whether the condition of the laboring classes in the United States is getting any worse, that is a difficult and complex question. I am inclined to think that it is, but whether it is or not, the feeling of dissatisfaction is evidently increasing. It is certainly becoming more and more difficult for a man in any particular occupation to become his own employer. The tendency of business of all kinds, both in production and in exchange, is concentration, to the massing of large capital and to the massing of men. The inventions and improvements of all kinds that have done so much to change all the aspects of production, and which are still going on, tend to require a greater and greater division of labor, the employment of more and more capital, and to make it more and more difficult for a man who has nothing but his labor to become his own employer, or to rise to a position of independence in his craft or occupation. Question from a congressional person. Sorry, man, it's the 1880s. Can you state any economic reason why that is the case? And Henry George answers, I do not believe that there is any conflict of interest between labor and capital, using those terms in their large sense. I believe the conflict is really between labor and monopoly. Capital is the instrument and tool of labor, and under conditions of freedom, there would be as much competition for the employment of capital as for the employment of labor. When men speak of the aggressions of capital and of the conflict between labor and capital, I think they generally have in mind aggregated capital. An aggregated capital, which is in some way or other a monopoly, more or less close. The earnings of capital, purely as capital, are always measured by the rate of interest, the return to capital for its employment, risk being as nearly as possible eliminated is interest, and interest has certainly for some time past been falling until now it is lower than it has ever been in this country before. The large businesses which yield great returns have in them always, I think, some element of monopoly. And he talks about some procedural thing and continues. I use the term monopoly in the sense of a peculiar privilege or power of doing certain things which other persons have not. There are various kinds of monopolies, as, for instance, the monopolies given by the patent laws, which give to the inventor or to his assigns the exclusive right to use a particular invention or process. And indie authors know this one well. There are certain businesses that are in their nature monopolies. For instance, in a little village, if one puts up a hotel which is sufficient to accommodate all the travel there, he will have a virtual monopoly of that business, for the reason that no one else will put up another to compete with him, knowing that it would result in the loss of money. And for that reason, our common law recognizes a peculiar obligation on the part of the innkeeper. He is not allowed to discriminate as between those who come to him for lodging or food. Again, a railroad is in its nature a monopoly. Where one line of road can do the business, no one else is going to build another alongside of it. And as we see in our railroad system, the competition of railroad companies is only between what they call competing points, where 2 or 3 roads come together. And as to these, the tendency is to do away with competition by contract or pooling. The telegraph business is in its nature a monopoly, and so with various others. Then again, there is a certain power of monopoly that comes with the aggregation of large capital in business. A man who controls a very large amount of capital can succeed by underselling and by other methods in driving out his smaller competitors, and very often in concentrating the business in his own hands. You see why I'm writing a novel about this? Okay, you see, Congress. You see the term in a broader sense then than that of a monopoly created by law. You include in it any exclusive right, whether created by facts and circumstances or by law. He answers, yes, as I've said, there are businesses which are in their very nature monopolies. The two most striking examples of that are the railroad and the telegraph. And then Congress questions. In your opinion, what are the economic reasons why business tends to become concentrated and why all industries have a tendency to aggregation in the hands of a few? Henry George answers, I think that is the universal tendency of all progress. Forgive the historical worldview here. It is because larger and larger capitals are required and because labor becomes more and more divided. For instance, when boots and shoes are made by hand, the only capital required is a lapstone and a little kit of tools. And any man who has learned the trade and can get a piece of leather can sit down and make a pair of shoes. He can do it in his own house and can finish his product there and sell it. But when a machine is invented to be used in that business, the shoemaker requires capital enough to purchase that machine, and as more and more machines are invented, more and more capital is needed, while the skill required becomes less and less. I believe you have it in testimony here that in the process of shoemaking now, there are 64 different branches, thereby requiring that number of costly machines and differentiating that trade into that number of subdivisions. Ellipsis. Machinery, this is so exciting. This is so exciting to the nerd over here. Machinery, in my opinion, ought to be an advantage to labor. Its primary effect is simply to increase the product of labor, to add to the power of labor, and enable it to produce more. One would suppose, and in fact it was supposed at the beginning of the era of modern inventions, that the effect of the introduction of machinery would be to very greatly improve the condition of the laboring classes and largely to raise wages. I think it quite certain that its effect has not been that while very many articles have been greatly cheapened in cost and in price, wherever there has been an increase in the wages of labor, it can be traced to something else, generally to the effects of the laborers themselves, by the formation of trades unions and organizations which have wrested from their employers a higher rate of wages, or to improvements in government, or improvements in intelligence, or improvements in morals. I think that whoever will thoroughly examine the facts will come to the conclusion that John Stuart Mill is right when he says that all the labor-saving machinery that has hitherto been invented has not lessened the toil of a single human being. While, on the other hand, by permitting and requiring this great subdivision of labor and dispensing to a great extent with skill on the part of the laborer, it has reduced him to a far more dependent condition than that which he occupied before. That is illustrated by the case we were speaking of a while ago. The old-fashioned shoemaker, having learned his trade and purchased his kit of tools, was his own master. If he did not find work in one place, he could find it in another place. He had the means of earning a livelihood wherever he could find people who wanted shoes. And this is also the case in that Tramp Printers book that I'm talking about, that I have talked about and we'll talk about again later. But now the shoemaker must find a great factory and an employer with a large amount of capital. Without such an employer, he is utterly helpless. He cannot make a shoe. He can only make 1/10 or 1/64th part of a shoe, or whatever the proportion may be. It is the same way with all the other trades into which machinery has largely entered. The effect of the introduction of machinery in any trade is to dispense with skill and to make the laborer more helpless. I think you all understand that effect of machinery. Interesting. And then there's this part at the very beginning, which is from R. Heber Newton. That's the same kind of thing. For the most part, mechanism takes the life out of labor as the handicraft becomes the manufacture, or more properly, the machinofacture. And the problem of today is how to keep up the interest of labor in its daily task, from which the zest has been stolen. So good. So this is why I was like nerding out on that book. Courtney's here to say hello. Yes, this excerpt makes me want to seize the means of production. I am right with you. Yeah. So there we go. We're on the second book of my recent reads. These are all, well, I didn't like 3 Men in a Boat. I did like Labor and Capital in the Gilded Age. That was a research book. This is the point at which I'm halfway through and I'm going to say, thank you for coming. Please like this video and subscribe for more similar videos. I don't think I'll do one of these every month, but I think I'll gather up books that seem to have like a really fiery passage to read until I have a handful to make a long enough video. And since this is called Dramatic Reads, it's not a dense text. The engineer, John, is over here calling this a dense text, but as I'm reading it, it's very clear in my head. So maybe I'm just an economics wonk at this point, but I hope it became more clear when I read it, because that's sort of the point, is that when you read and share and discuss, like, you realize, oh, these seem kind of like basic truths, and like I've seen this in real life and it makes sense to me. So thanks for listening in and commenting. I appreciate it. But since this is called the Dramatic Reading Series, I wanted to ask who here identifies as a theater kid, because a lot of the live streams I've been in lately, it seems like a common thread. So I just wanted to put this out there and ask if anyone else, and see if my theory is correct. I don't think John's in that category, but Courtney might be. I don't know. So I'll leave that up for people to leave comments and move on to my next book, which I'm sure you've all heard about before. And I've read one poem from it already, but I also wanted to thank Trident Bookstore in Boston, because this is one of the books I found there and I sat down to read right away and like started chipping off at right away. It was one of those impulse buys, but a really good one, because it was a real good payoff. Instead of climate doom and gloom, it's a very varied, as you'll see. I'm going to read a few passages from it. A varied look at what people are doing and how they're analyzing the crisis and how they're fighting back and how they want to work together, and even some poetry. So I've popped. Oh, we got some more people in here. Hey, Jim, Amazon is the 21st century monopoly, along with Google, along with Apple, along with Facebook. Yep. And we have John saying, not me as the theater kid. Courtney saying, I was never a theater kid, but I've known a few in my time. They're good company. I must put that out there. This is the bookstore where I got this. If you're ever in Boston, I would recommend Trident Booksellers and Cafe. They were great. And Shannon's in here. Hello, Shannon. And she is a theater kid. So I think she was one of the people that I noticed who had that in their background. And I'm, just like, putting your name down on a list. Not sure what I'm going to do with the list, but it's going to make its way into something on this channel. So yes, I'm excited about that. All right. And so last book we have here. I'm going to start with a poem, but not the first one here. Here we go. So just so you know, I've got it on the screen. All We Can Save, Truth, Courage, and Solutions for the Climate Crisis, edited by Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, who is awesome on Twitter. Go follow her. And Katharine K. Wilkinson. So it's just such a new way to look at an anthology. You've got editor's notes, you've got asterisks, you've got underlined, you've got resources to pursue at the end. You've got little mini bios for all the contributors. It's so happy making. It's so collaborative. And the structure of the book is that way, as well as the content in it. So this is why I'm gaga over this book. Okay, so the first part is a poem by Marge Piercy, who I think is a fantasy writer. I can't remember. Maybe I know that name as a poet. But anyway, Marge Piercy, the poem is called To Be of Use. The people I love the best jump into work head first, without dallying in the shallows, and swim off with sure strokes almost out of sight. They seem to become natives of that element, the black, sleek heads of seals bouncing like half-submerged balls. I love people who harness themselves, an ox to a heavy cart, who pull like water buffalo with massive patience, who strain in the mud and the muck to move things forward, who do what has to be done again and again. I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who are not parlor generals and field deserters, but move in a common rhythm when the food must come in or the fire be put out. The work of the world is common as mud. Botched, it smears the hands, crumbles to dust. But the thing worth doing well done has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphoras for wine or oil, Hopi vases that held corn, are put in museums, but you know they were made to be used. The pitcher cries for water to carry, and a person for work that is real. And doesn't that just go with the labor and capital thing? This is what happens when you read 6 books at once, is that you get a little bit of something in one book that makes you zing a connection to another book. So I really like that ending about a person wanting their work to be real and valuable and, yeah, help people to be of use. So I really liked that. There we go. Courtney says, I see the connection between the 2 readings. Did I try for that? I don't know, maybe. Yeah. Okay, so then next up we have, go back to the beginning. This is an excerpt from the essay Collards Are Just as Good as Kale by Heather McTeer Toney. And this is just like a small piece. It could have gone, well, actually, that was Indigenous Joy. So this is Climate Justice Joy highlighted. Heather McTeer Toney. And she's highlighting the work of Dr. Mildred McLean. She says, Dr. Mildred McLean is whom I picture when I imagine a matriarch of the environmental justice movement. Arrayed in colorful skirts and beautiful wraps, her presence speaks of strength, struggle, and perseverance. It's for good reason. For 3 decades, Dr. McLean has been the voice of resilience throughout the Savannah, Georgia community. When the air was thick with pollution from the shipping channels in the Savannah port, Dr. McLean convened community meetings so that people were part of the solution. She encouraged African Americans in her community to become certified in environmental fields like hazardous waste removal, soil remediation, and air monitoring. Not only is she an environmental justice leader, but she is our environmental justice griot, the holder of stories past and instructor of how to survive what is to come. When I read that, I was like, oh, that's so good. So if you don't know, a griot, Griot, it's a West African language family word. Maybe Courtney knows more about this one. But it's a word that I've come across when I read translated fiction from Senegal, especially in my experience. It means like the traditional storyteller of the tribe or the group of people who live together. And so it would be a very respected role. Although the book that I'm reading now, Segu by Maurice Condé, the griots seem to be sort of like the chattery women in the marketplace rather than a respected role, but we'll see if that develops into something different. But anyway, so that griot role, the environmental justice griot, the holder of stories past and instructor of how to survive what is to come, that seems so cool. So I loved that that essayist put that in so that I could envision that and connect it in that way. I thought that was really neat. Sandy's here. Sandy at Ms. Reads a Lot just joined. Hi, everyone. Hi, hi, hi. Hi, hi, hi. I've gone through 3 Men in a Boat and Labor and Capital in the Gilded Age, and I'm on my last book where I'm reading a few passages. So the next one for this dramatic reading is just a quote. Oh, and I was gonna look up the title of her book because I forgot it because I haven't got it. Heather McGee. The Sum of Us. There we go. The Sum, S-U-M. So Heather McGee came out with this earlier this year, and it's a fantastic tome that I have on my wish list. But she just has this quote in here. that says inequality and climate change are the twin challenges of our time, and more democracy is the answer to both. Agree or disagree in the comments. Fight me. I want to hear it. I want to hear more about people's opinions of that. That just seems like the mic drop moment of the book. So I really liked that, and I wanted to relay it out there. And again, Heather McGhee, the sum of us, she's gone on lots of interviews, lots of like book tour talks, and she sounds fabulous. So definitely check her out. It's MCGHEE. I think she's even talked to Oprah. So, just look that one up. Courtney's interested in reading the Heather McGhee book too. Okay. I think we might get more out of that one together than the Edwardians. What do you think? And she also says, I have a lot of thoughts about democracy. I think maybe we should collaborate on this in the new year. That sounds like a great idea. Okay. And then second to last is, this is a good essay. This is another like really good connection. This essay is by Kendra Pierre Lewis, and it's called Wakanda Doesn't Have Suburbs. It's sort of about city planning. It's sort of about environmental justice. And there's a lot more in the essay, but I was just going to read a short piece of it. So this is Kendra Pierre Louis, I don't know. I think she's from Louisiana. So I'm trying to pronounce it in the French way, but I'll just leave it. Hi. Okay, so page 144. And yet, when we talk about climate change, there's often a hidden resignation. Like, of course we harmed the earth. And when we talk about acting on it, there's also an undercurrent, that it will require a level of sacrifice that is worth it, but just barely. What if, instead, the story we tell about climate change is that it is an opportunity, one for humans to repair our relationship with the earth and re-envision our societies in ways that are not just in keeping with our ecosystems, but also make our lives better? If this doesn't sound possible, ask yourself, why not? So good. And the Wakanda part of the essay is really good too. So once again, recommend this book right here, All We Can Save. So good. And then finally, I have a poem to close, because I don't do Poetry Thursday. That's for cooler people. I'm doing my dramatic reading on Friday. Shannon's saying, me too. I think that might be about the thoughts about democracy. And Courtney saying, I'm in. Okay, we'll plan this for the new year. I only have one buddy to read, so you can pick the month, and I'll like budget for getting that book. Or we can maybe see when it comes out in paperback, because I'm always a fan of buying paperbacks instead. All right. Let me take that down. And this is a poem called November by Lena Odell. And I didn't look up Lena Odell. In the bios piece. Nope. Okay. Well, I'll look her up later. This poem is called November, and I thought it's November, so why not end with that for our dramatic reading series? Lena Odell, November. If I can't save us, then let me feel you happy and safe under my chin. If this will drown or burn, then let us drink starlight, nap under trees, sing on beaches. The morning rush to sit indoors is for what again? If we are dying, then let me rip open and bleed love. Spill it, spend it, see how much there is. The reward for misers is what again? If this life is ending, then let me begin a new one. I don't know why it's titled November. That's a good question to ask Lena Odell, Lynna Odell. I wonder if that has anything to do with Samhain and starting over the new year. That'd be kind of cool. Yeah. So there we go. Shannon says, I think my internet is slow when I add to the chat. It's long after everyone else. Could be. Maybe it's because it's a telegraph monopoly 100 years later. Lovely poem, isn't it? I know. So this is one of those things, if you're researching, you look in the back for resources cited, and then you have like a whole new treasure trove of people to look up. So those people that I mentioned in this stream, I will definitely encourage you to look up. Even the old ones like Henry George. It's very interesting concepts. So yeah, that is my dramatic reading. I had a couple things to, I was going to say crow about. That's not very nice. Tomorrow I have my first in-person event. So if anyone watching this is in the Portland, Oregon area, like Leo, if you get this in time, tomorrow afternoon in Selwood, there's a coffee shop that's like an art gallery, very good vibe. And we're going to have a little book event. I think there's 6 or 8 authors who are doing little readings and just sort of chatting with people and selling books. So if you happen to be in the neighborhood, stop on by. It's called Awake Coffee and Art. It's going to be fun. I'm out of practice, so this is going to be a good dry run for Yola Book of Flow at PDX, which is much bigger. And the other thing that I was going to put out there is on my channel, and that is Sunday's interview with author Emily Harris. And I'll put that out here. She is a lovely author of steamy historical fiction, as she puts on her branding. And she's been traveling a lot and putting out some very thought-provoking videos, as well as reviews of other author tubers. So if you want to check out her channel, it's Emily with an EE instead of a Y. So, and that is her pen name. But we might be talking about that on Sunday at 2 Western time. So hopefully that works for people. Wait. Oh, I missed a few here. Shannon says, whenever I do research, I always look for the sources. Yeah, it's like a genealogy chart. You're, searching back through. Wish I could be there. I appreciate that. No one does any author readings in my small town. Well, that seems like a hole you could fill, right? And Sandy's saying, I wonder if I could talk my husband into a road trip this weekend. Yeah, I don't know how far. It looks like it's not going to be super rainy, so at least it might be, I don't know, nice. Put your sunscreen on in the car when you drive, because overcast days are pretty bad for sun. But those are our coming attractions. Since Sandy is here, I want to do a little plug. We're reading Maggie O'Farrell's Hamnet, as the rest of the world has already done. And I'm 3/4 through, I guess, and it's really good. I am glad I'm taking this in little bites with Sandy, because I think I would probably blow through it too quickly if I wasn't reading it with someone else. The tone is incredible. And I think it's going to be a book that I reread a while later and just step back into the world. And if anyone has opinions about what makes that tone, like if English professors, for example, Courtney on the line, have opinions about why, it's not just present tense, because I've read other present tense books and they're annoying, but it's something like dreamy and a little bit of the supernatural and short paragraphs, maybe. But it gives us this really different vibe from any other book I've read, which is really, really good. So I'm reading Hamnet with Sandy. I'm still reading Red Mars. Oh my God. I have decided that I'm not going to read Green Mars, which is the one I accidentally bought first, because I cannot take this long to get through 600-page tiny books. It's if you're a writer and you've heard of scene and sequel, I'm kind of getting that vibe, but instead of scene and sequel, it's like an interesting part and then a long, boring, mechanical explanation part. And then an interesting part and then a long, and it's like 20, 30 pages of boring. And I'm like, I want to get through this. And then we're going to have our live discussion on Friday, the 26th, next Friday. So I am so close. Sorry, sci-fi people. Sorry. This one I talked about in my Native November video earlier this week, A Mind Spread Out on the Ground by Alicia Elliott. It's fantastic. I actually sent this recommendation to a friend who I used to be in a writing group group with, because her essays remind me of Laura's, and they're like overlapping circles in a pond where you're starting with one thought, you bring in another thought, and then they collide, and then you see how she's like woven together or echoed in water. These really interesting, different topics, and so fabulous. So I'm really enjoying this, and again, like going through it slowly because it's really good, and I want to savor it. I just started these two yesterday because I was in a weird mood and I just couldn't settle, so I just read all day. This is the one I'm gonna do for nonfiction November. I figured I should start it. What would Jane say? It's a lot about the interests of business and designing cities, so it's also sort of going into labor and capital issues, which is fabulous, and talking about women's role. So it's a lot about Burnham's part, and I'm assuming it's going to flip over to women who had thoughts about city planning in Chicago in 1909-ish next. So I'm excited for that. I just got started. And then finally, the big chunker, the Segu by Maryse Condé. So I've just read one chapter of this, and I'm reading this together with Bria. We haven't connected very much on stuff, but supposedly we're both starting on it now. And it's big. It's tiny. But Maryse Condé is an author I've been wanting to read ever since Books by Lena, who just dropped a video. You will be glad to know she's not harmed and missing. She's like was just offline for a while. We were getting worried about her. But she recommended Maryse Condé, and she wrote I Tituba or Tituba, depending on where you are. And that's what I wanted to get, but this is what the used bookstore had, so I took it. And it's a sweeping historical epic. I mentioned this on the Sunday show with the historical fiction authors who write historical epics, Vanessa Riley and Susanna Kearsley. And so, yeah, I'm excited. It's starting out with a good inciting incident and good writing, translation. So I will be happy to talk about that later. Sandy's saying it's only from Seattle. Yeah. Courtney's saying I haven't read it, so no insight here for Hamnet. Okay, well when you do, or if other English people, if Cynthia ever wanders on here, maybe Cynthia has some I don't know, insights about this. Shannon's saying tone comes from a few things, right? Connotations and associations we have with word sounds. Oh, true. That's good. Yeah, maybe I'll look at some of the like just take a page and annotate the word sounds and see if that's contributing. That's a good point. Word sounds like K words are harsh and jarring. A lot of antagonists' names start with K. Interesting. Oh gosh. It seems almost like psychoanalysis. That would be fun if you could do that for one of my books. Like why do I have two good characters whose names start with H? Like what does that say about me? Sandy saying, I have to drop. Love the readings. Thank you, Sandy. And that is it for my current reads, coming attractions, and the dramatic readings for this month. So thanks everyone for stopping by. I had a final banner, and I put the poll question up. I did all the things I was meant to do. So now all I have to do is say, thank you. And if you see me reading anything that sounds really good and you want a dramatic reading, or you want like a little bit more of a substantial taste, I'm open to requests. So let me know. Maybe that'll go in my next dramatic reading. All right. Shannon plans to do a YouTube series on the psychology of words. I taught this class to my junior students. That's never come up in mind. That's really cool. Bye, guys. Well done. Thank you, John. Nice to see you. Advanced English class. Oh, you're making me feel better about myself. Jim saying, good as very nice. JD just sliding in. Lol, as per usual, latest fuck. Thanks. Thanks, everybody. Just in time to say hi before we finish. Yep. Bye, everybody. Have a lovely weekend. Happy Friday, and I'll see you again soon.